Welcome to our time with pastors, pastoring in a time of social distancing with the University Ministries and University Christian Fellowship. And so we're excited to have these guest panelists with us today. So Sandra Maria Van Opstal, the Executive Director of Chasing Justice Together Foundation, as well as the teaching pastor at Grace and Peace. Also Paco Amador. He's the lead pastor with New Life Covenant Church, and New Life Centers Ministries in Little Village here in Chicago, Illinois. And then Jason Dewey, he is the co-pastor with the Sign of the Dove Church in Waukegan, Illinois. And so we wanted to talk to these pastors as we think about this sudden disruption in the way we do life and ministry, especially when ministry from the early church days has been in togetherness and community and working together. And what does that look like when this total disruption to our ministry changes the way we do life? When it's required to stay at home, and even in spaces where we could be relatively together, there's this requirement of physical distancing, or otherwise known as social distancing. And so we wanted to invite these leaders, these practitioners, to talk with us so that we can learn about what they've been experiencing and learning. All right. So I would love for you guys for people to get to know you a little bit. And so could you tell us, starting with, I'll just give you an order for this. So Sandra, then Paco, and Jason, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your family, your immediate family, and tell us about your church and your congregation, so we can get to know the community in which you live and minister with. So Sandra, hopefully that was.
Yeah, sorry, my internet, of course, is unstable. So social distancing and unstable internet, let me start with that. When your kids have to do everything on internet and you have to do everything on internet. So I live and pastor in the communities of what is like Humboldt Park, kind of North Austin. And let's see, aside from my very unstable internet, I have 2 5-year-old children. So I am now a homeschooler, and mostly this is actually being done by my husband, who's a consultant and working from home. And he is more patient than I am with our children. So he's also on a leave right now. So he's been able to kind of pick that up. But we're basically at home full time with our kids. And I pastor at Grace and Peace Church, as you said, and it's located in North Austin. And we have a factory, basically an old paint factory that's converted into a church and community center and kind of hub of different nonprofit organizations. And we're running some work out of there right now. And my son has asthma, so I'm actually at home this whole time because I can't be exposed to folks out there and about. So I'm not the one doing the grocery shopping. I'm not the one going to church. I'm actually literally have been at home for 4 weeks, aside from an occasional outdoor activity. So, but yeah, so I'm here with my family. There's 4 of us, trapped in a very small flat, Chicago flat, and trying to survive this this invitation to stay home.
Yeah, good. That's good. Hi, Sandra. It's so good to see you. So good to be here at least in this kind of setting. Paco, I'm a pastor in a Mexican immigrant neighborhood of Little Village here in Chicago's West Side. Pastor an English and Spanish congregation, 2 different ones, and I have 8 kids at home, and 7 kids at home. One is actually living on the north side. She's part of a Moody student cohort, Albany Park, and but other than that, we have children really at every stage of having children, kind of, adult children and a bunch of teenagers, which that makes it exciting. And then, the one that wants to rough around and play and talked us into camping last night. So I'm actually, we put the tent in the living room yesterday, so only the dog could go by around us. And then the little one, we have a 2-year-old, and so we have kids at kind of every stage. I've never realized how well, I do love my kids. I've never spent this much time with my kids. And so anyways, we're enjoying whatever can be enjoyed of this season, and trying to battle hard, to stay fully connected with people, chasing people who are disconnected, and trying to love people through this season. It's good to be here in this conversation. Looking forward to this time.
Jason.
Yeah, so I'm also grateful to be here. Excited to be able to just jump in and have this important conversation with all of you. So I married to my wife, Sonia. Next month, we'll be celebrating 20 years. So excited for that. I just thought this morning, I've got to figure out how you do stay-at-home anniversary plans for the 20th anniversary, but we'll come up with something, I'm sure. We've got 3 kids at home between the ages of 11 and 17. We have an older daughter who's married, serving in the Air Force in Northern Italy. And her husband, our son-in-law, are expecting a baby this summer. So I'm going to be a grandfather here pretty soon. Excited about that. Figuring out how to travel to see him. I don't know how that's going to work out, but we'll see. So we're in Waukegan. Our church has been here about 30 years or so. My in-laws founded the church. It's a non-denominational independent church that has sort of mixed roots in Black Baptist church and a little bit of Assembly of God influence, so you can kind of think of that combination. But multi-ethnic congregation, although we're predominantly African-American. Waukegan is about 35 miles or so north of downtown Chicago. For those that don't know, unlike most of Lake County, which is apparently the second wealthiest county in Illinois, not quite the same. And on this side of the county, a little different population and a little different socioeconomic status and some different issues, but we love it here and serve alongside Pastor Corey Ratliff. We've been serving for a little over 2 years now as co-senior pastors, and great group of people that we get to serve alongside. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about some of that. So that's us in a nutshell.
Great. So as we think about the setting, it was a very abrupt change for all of us, I believe. From this in-person ministry, very hands-on ministry. And actually, I'd love to, even starting with Paco, some of the things at New Life Centers, just to give people a context of even before and maybe for out of all of your ministries, some of the things, if you can share some of the context of the ministry that was happening before COVID-19 and the stay-at-home orders. So, yeah.
Well, with New Life Centers, we do a lot, but mostly the focus is on mentoring youth. But one of the ministries that we also had going, and of course New Life Centers continues to mentor from a distance, and it's a really cool thing to see how even after school program being connected, and this is a brand new learning curve for everybody to be connected. One of the things that we were doing is feeding people in our community, and this ministry started around 15 years. It's kind of like the main grassroots kind of ministry, feeding around 75 families every week, just from getting food from different organizations and that kind of stuff. People who run it are all, just started very grassroots. If you go to the dictionary, grassroots, you would see this kind of thing, really people just wanting to help another, and no one has an education, graduate degree on, social work or anything. It's just neighbors loving neighbors. And they kind of decided, hey, we can just leverage our influence, and we can get some food, get other people that can. And throughout the last 15 years, it's been going on, and it's interesting. This thing hit, and the moment it hit, it just kind of that little ministry, which is called Bread of Life, it just kind of morphed into a bigger thing. It's gone from around 75 families every week to close to, probably 400 families every week, giving food boxes and all that kind of stuff. And a really cool thing that happened 2 weeks before, there's a grocery store right across the street from our church building. And 2 weeks before, the whole pandemic really kind of became a very real thing for us. Even, 3 weeks before the governor announced and all those things, the lady from the store, she had been cleaning nopales, cactus, for probably like 30 years and selling them. People from all over, Mexicans from all over the Chicagoland area would drive to just pick up her nopales because, they're like, they're very prickly. And she knew, she had like these fingers and anyway, so she said, I'm tired and I want to close the store. And so she decided to close it. And she told us a date. So a Sunday before she closed, we showed up, we closed the service down, we crossed the street, we pulled her out of the store, and we kind of had like an impromptu party with mariachi and everything. And it was like a surprise for her. And of course, we didn't think anything was going to happen. We just really literally wanted to say thank you for, the many chips she had sold us throughout the years. She single-handedly carried the chip industry in our community, and almost. Fast forward to this moment, she emptied the store, left, just the fridges, and closed down. She was tired, but she couldn't go to Mexico yet because she wasn't able to finalize the closing. So just this last week, she said, hey, listen, I'm just giving you the keys. And until I'm able to finally sell this thing, you can use my walk-in freezer, my, everything. So we've moved the entire ministry across the street to a place that is being lent to us. And I just went and looked at the video of when we all gathered together. It was such a surprising thing. She was weeping. I don't think she ever knew how many people really loved her. And it was like a great joy. And felt like that kind of turned around to being a great blessing of cooperation together. And so we're pretty much doing everything from her setup, grocery store with fridges and stands and everything that's donated. The vans come in the back of the store, and it's kind of cool to see that. Of course, we couldn't have predicted that, but just a long standing ministry just kind of evolved into a different and very strong calling. I kind of like it. I like seeing it, and thank God for what's happening there too as well.
That's great. That ongoing relationship. It's come out of that. It wasn't just this just happened and there was nowhere to go, and it wasn't even planned. But because of that past relationship with the community, and I know that chip woman exactly being in the neighborhood, so that's exciting. I'd love to hear more. We'd love to hear more of how is relationship, the ways that the relationships among the congregation and the community, how is that benefited or evolved in this time post during COVID-19? I mean,
yeah. It's interesting to see how, like 15 years ago, just a real quick recap. There was a community organization wrote a plan, a community benefits plan for our community, saying this would be the way that we're hoping our community to look like, with stores and jobs and health and education, everything. And at the back of their book, they printed all of the partners, and there was only one church included as part of the partners of people who are looking for the betterment of their community, really collaborating with many others for the benefit of all neighbors. And I remember thinking at that time, wow, this is like the church is clearly absent where the church should really be front and center. And so we actually called the leaders of this community organization, and we repented before them, and we told them, hey, I think you're doing our mission statement, and we apologize, and would you forgive us? And we repented before them. They forgave us, and then they said, hey, why don't you open your building? You know, two things that community organizations know that the church has buildings and facilities, and the church have people who volunteer, there's this fire to just serve. And so fast forward to this moment, it's interesting. I remember throughout the years praying, God, how can we as the church be at the center of the community? Even if people don't believe what we believe, don't love, our God, they think we're a cult. At the first moment of need, they would come to us, knowing, hey, those people are going to love us. And it's interesting, it's taken many years, sweat and tears, a lot of, failed opportunities and things. But it's interesting, the moment this thing hit, people started calling the church. Like the church really in our community became like a place where people would naturally call, even community organizations saying, hey, you should really go to that church, call them, look for them, they can help you. And, it's become a little bit more like that. Of course, we can't do everything. We're collaborating with many other partners in the community, but I feel like that little dream of being, in Latin America, the church is right in the center of town. And I feel like it's actually looking at the government. There's a plaza where people stand, there's a church, and then there's the government. And the church kind of like oversees the people and stands looking at the government, kind of like in a way of saying, hey, we are checking you. We would not let you get away with things that you shouldn't. And feels like the church should always be at the center of the community, center of life of the community.
Amen. Amen. I love that. Like, call the church. People tell them, call the church when you're in need. Wow. So I'd love for Jason and then Sandra, love to hear from you guys along those. Yeah,
I love that. I think one of the things that perhaps is a little bit more unique about our situation that was in place before all this happened is an effort that's been happening the last couple of years amongst churches in our community. There's 12 churches in Waukegan. We're part of a program called the Mosaic Initiative, where the goal is primarily focused on really reaching young adults and bringing the millennial generation back into the church and into faith. But a wonderful byproduct of that has been just a deeper level of unity amongst our churches across denominations and ethnic groups in our city. And most specifically with our pastors, meet a couple times a month. And so all of that to say, the backdrop of those relationships and the partnerships that have been developing have allowed us to even engage together in serving our community even during this situation, right? So we had already been praying, kind of like Paco alluded to, about, how do we co-shepherd our city together, and how can we leverage the resources and the connections that we have? So we had already been taking steps in that direction, and then this gave us some additional motivation and opportunity to do that. So one of the things that's come out of that is a partnership of a handful of the churches that are doing a similar work of feeding people, right? As that is a pressing need. And in this particular moment, so one of our churches, Christian Neighbors Church, just, a couple miles from us, is leading that effort, but we've been able to just join in because of the partnership we had, and take our resources and both people and financially as we can to help serve those in our community that are in that place of need for food or aren't able to get transportation out. And so, but I credit the work that had already been doing, right, in the partnerships, and where, several churches were said, hey, we just want to serve the community together. It's not about our individual congregation or that, but so now we're able to find ways to do the things that we were wanting to do, and look for ways to continue to develop this even going forward even more so. So that's just one example on our end.
great. And Sandra.
Yes. Hopefully my internet is now stable. Every time I hear Pastor Paco tell stories about his neighborhood, I just get so excited because because I know the church and I know the community, I can imagine what's happening there. And I think their stories help us to understand what church and community looks like. So I think that, you know, oftentimes we can talk about values and we can share invitations from scripture to our congregants, or to, especially in the context of InterVarsity, to young people who are asking the question, what does it mean to love Jesus and live in the world that I live in, and to make my life matter and count for something? And especially this generation, because we know that that's like at the forefront. Like I want to make a difference in the world. That the Barna research shows that, the Pew research shows that I want to make a difference. And so they oftentimes are located in communities and congregations and churches who historically have not been doing the kinds of things that Pastor Paco talked about. And so I think what I realized was, we think it's normal what we're doing at church as grace and peace, but actually what I saw happen was all these churches try to ask questions like, what does it mean to be the church when we can't come together on a Sunday morning? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is not the church. Sunday morning is like, I used to tell people, our church is like a community center, kind of like neighbor that happens to meet on a Sunday to remind ourselves why we do the rest of things Monday through Saturday. We see hundreds of people throughout the week. And because our church at the time was only about 70, now it's close to 200, but at the time it was 70 people a few years back. Like we see more people, way more people during the week than we see on the weekend at the Sunday service. And I think that COVID exposed, and the order to stay home exposed, that we have a sickness in this country, in our way of viewing church, which is that church is about intellectual assent. I mean, I went to a seminary that taught me to spend 70% of my time preparing this part of people's spiritual life. That's not what life is about. I mean, our values are shaped, obviously, the scripture says we're transformed by the renewing of our minds, but it's our faith and belief and understanding really what the Old Testament calls belief is a way of being and a way of living. So I think COVID exposed people's activity as congregations' activity as being really focused on the intellectual and the emotional experience of people, and not really the lifestyle of a Christian. And churches that were doing those, primarily ethnic minority churches, primarily Black urban churches, immigrant churches in the suburbs, they're the ones that are already set up for food distribution, because guess what? We don't have access to it in our communities because we live in food deserts, or because people are working 3 jobs and still can't put food on the table. So I think we were set up for that already. And I believe actually something really interesting happened. I believe that there has been an opportunity over the last 2 months for the majority church in our country to turn their heads to the urban and ethnic minority and immigrant churches to learn how to do this better. And I don't think it's happening, because all of these seminars that I'm seeing on like how to, it's like literally, I just was asked to be a part of one, and I looked at it and I was like, 14 people, 1 Black male, 1 white woman. This is not the future of the church. It definitely isn't the demographic of the church in our country. It definitely isn't the future of our church. So I think a couple things got spurred for me. One was not just what's happening locally, because I see like Sign of the Dove and New Canaan and New Life, and I see all these things. But what really sparked my imagination was, what invitation does the church, not just our local churches, have our young people that are leaving our churches? What can we do and enter into as a way of actually making a better future? What does this invite us to and I don't think really it's churches. I mean, we all can grow, but I'm not thinking primarily of churches like Sign of the Dove and New Life or Grace and Peace. I'm thinking of churches whose whole church life was Sunday activities, and maybe like if they're really, really on top of it, small groups. And if they're like super, super, like holy, then they might have like a food pantry once a week or something like that. But they're not really engaged or involved in their neighbors' lives. If they shut down, nobody would notice. So in their actual neighborhood. So I think there's an opportunity. And instead of feeling like, oh, let's just critique all the ways the church is being right now, I think it's more like, let's invite imagination. Let's invite a new imagination, because right now, if you don't know, if you haven't if you don't know, we have a new executive order from this administration closing down our borders to any kind of immigrants, including people that have green cards and are out of the country right now. But did you know that 30% of all our physicians and 40% of all our home health aid people are immigrants? Did you know that a majority of the people working in our grocery stores, producing food, delivering our mail, are people of color and immigrants? So I feel like the very people that that our society has historically and is currently squashing are the very people that are holding this country together right now. And our churches represent these people. There are congregants that are delivering mail, cleaning factories. In our hospitals and clinics, they're the ones that are cleaning up after the surgeries and the COVID patients move on. They're the most at danger. They're the least supplied with health protective aids. And I think that our young people are looking at that. I really do. I think young people of faith who are in love with Jesus are thinking, this is now like an opportunity, and what are our churches doing? So on a local level, yes, I mean, definitely. We have food distribution. We've served over 1,700 families in the last few weeks. I don't know how many thousands of pounds of food. We have delivery to those who are out. There's so much going on at Grace and Peace. We are calling people. We're doing health check wellness with elderly. But what I'm really keeping my eye on is anyone paying attention to what's happening in our country more broadly? And how is the Christian community giving voice to that? Because, I mean, if things keep going the way they're going, we're going to do two things. Miss out an opportunity to be, as what Paco said, for the church to be at the center of the community, keeping our government accountable. And we're going to miss an opportunity of an entire generation of Christians that understands that the Bible does call us to more than just relief and compassion. It calls us to address systems that are affecting people. So I think both of those are necessary. And I think COVID it's a terrible situation that we're all in, but what a perfect opportunity for us to repent, really, and change and grow and be different. And really to allow churches like who have been doing this already to be leading us in that. So that's where my mind is at. I definitely I love my neighbors doing the rides, but my mind's on the larger who is the church
Mm-hmm.
and how can we be different? So.
And that's a great segue actually into thinking about, so what are some of the broader pieces as developing a congregation, having a congregation that was ready, that it's not just being a congregation. I love what you said, that it's not, it's almost like a community center that happens to meet on Sundays, right? This, that the gospel, lots of times we separate these things, that, well, there's the gospel and these works when they're all the gospel, right? And so, but there are people who have these aspirations, and we have these aspirations for our students to be those type of congregants. What kind of, as you think about the community, because really you're ministering to the community, as you think about the community you've been ministering to and the people that come to services, worship services, what kind of discipleship does it take? What are some advice that you from your own experience that has developed these kind of people who are willing to serve in the midst of us and see the need and respond? I will start with, let's see, I don't know. Let's start, Jason, Paco, Sandra, yeah, what do you guys?
Hey, Sandra, I want to kind of follow up on what you were saying.
Okay.
The identity of the church really is kind of church as, being led by the Holy Spirit is never being in question. The Holy Spirit is not, but I feel like there's some things that we must shed. And I think these kinds of events really test the kind of church that in general we think the church is. And feel like there's something really positive at being shaken. throughout the history of the people of Israel, God allowed several things to happen to kind of like shake things in the people of Israel that they thought this was the way things were supposed to be. And I feel like one of the issues is, like thinking of church as a Sunday morning. I feel like it's been for years, the thought that, church is really several things. The church is the building, is Sunday morning, is the preacher, with some sort of personality, is the sermon, and that the church is programs that happen. But really, what are we when we don't have any of those things? It's interesting. I was we have like a collaborative with pastors from Latin America. We're talking with them, and one of the pastors said, Sunday morning, I go in, Facebook to kind of try to start my Facebook Live for our church. And it's like thousands, all these churches, Facebook says, you can boost this post. And so everybody's like boosting their post. And so, like thousands of church services, like, whoa, I've never seen that guy. It's like, whoa, I've never seen that, and they're all standing in amazing auditoriums and lights and like, smoke and everything. And he was saying, I wonder why anybody would ever want to come and listen to me. Like I pastor a church of like, 30 people here in some, small neighborhood in Mexico. And it's interesting that he goes live and all these people join in, all these, and instead of it being very sharp with like, sound, perfect sound, and it's got a lot of tricks and things are not working well. It's like, can you hear me? And, that kind of stuff. And they just say hi, hey, hermana. So it's like, hey, hermana, ¿cómo están los niños? Like, and he was reflecting, why did all these people come to our gathering instead of the cool, really amazing lights and flashes and awesome preachers? Why did they come? Because I feel like the truth is that humans have always been looking for community, have always been looking for a place to be known, to be loved, where I can really check in with humans who know me by name and really care for me and love me. And really, if you have lights and show, like, who really cares about that? That really wasn't the center of what humans desperately need. Humans desperately need to be known and loved. And I feel like, can the church be that? Like, well, the church was always meant to be that, a family of faith. A lot of the images of the church is a table, a meal, family. Like, if we are that, man, then if we're able to transition, shedding a lot of this show stuff down to, so the most important thing that I do is not the sermon on Sunday. It's a good sermon. It's a good moment, but it's not the most important thing. It's like, I feel like it's interesting. This Sunday I preached, I looked afterwards and I thought I spoke for 18 minutes. I was like, that was my sermon. And my wife said, I think that was too short. And all my kids were like, that was perfect. Like, can you cut it down 5 more minutes or something? But I feel like the center wasn't even the sermon. Of course, let's go to the word, but that's not the only time you can do it. I feel like a good revolution is happening among us, which, is good. I'm for it. I'm loving it.
And can I build off of what you're saying,
Yeah.
Paco? Because it's interesting. I'm doing all these, like, on all these webinars and also listening to all these webinars, like how to preach to, on Zoom, which is different than live streaming. Live streaming a church service is different than preaching on Zoom. And one of the things they were saying was, like, talking about particularly this generation's, like, how they view a conversation versus like being talked to. And they were talking about sermons being like 10 to 15 minutes. And I literally laughed out loud because I'm in the context of a Black brown church in the city that's kind of Pentecostal. So, like, if I preach under 50 minutes, I know I can with something because they're used to something else, And yet I was thinking about, like, sometimes we can illustrate, and so they were saying instead of 3 main points, have 1 main point. And I was like, oh my gosh, this this is going to be so hard for so many people I know, including myself, because I'm chatty. So, but I just really liked it. You know, it's like this time is begging for innovation and asking for something new. And it's like, wake up, you've been sleeping, people, on every level, like the way that we do things, you know. And it's what our next generation leaders have been asking for about 10 years. They've been yelling at us and we're not listening. So I found it, so I literally was cracking up out loud, like, yeah, that's how it should be. And not in a sense of to take something away, but to say the word of God is not always best. The word of God is not always best, I guess, taking root through speaking. It happens through worship. It happens through conversation. It happens through prayer. It happens through action. So I think that it's begging innovation. And I just love that, because I love to try new things. So I'm like, let's do something different. I think also, the idea that the church service or that the pastor's role is primarily preaching is that's what's taught to us in most contemporary Western seminaries. Think about how many classes you took on the canon of Scripture. I took 7 preaching classes. I took 1 counseling class. It's terrible. Like the whole system is
No, we're losing you.
Internet.
to weigh you toward.
Oh no.
It was just getting really good. And I was
I
like,
know.
I don't hear that.
That's how you cut down your sermons. You just have the internet cut off.
Like they used to do in radio. They used to cut you in the radio. They turn it off.
Can you hear me?
Almost.
Yeah, I think you're back now.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, I'm so sorry.
So you said about you were talking about seminary education.
Yeah, so that's right. That's where I was ending. That's a whole different webinar. But I think it doesn't invite us to think about formation. And as a worship leader who writes on worship, I'm going to tell you that worship is formation, and that's a different seminar altogether. But David Swanson, who to talk about worship, can you
Almost. It's just oh no.
I'm gonna walk.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
That's totally fine.
We're all learning to be more adaptable as well.
Oh, totally. I've been watching. Yes.
Okay. So I think that David Swanson's book, Rediscipling the White Church, it invites us to consider the way we have discipled, which is getting to your question. And I think that's a discipleship of intellect and emotion, and a discipleship of individualism, but it doesn't say to us, hey, and we're learning this, those of us that are teachers are teaching our children about curriculum for school right now. It's like, that's not how kids learn, you know? But so we took our kids last Friday to Stateville Prison in the car. We stayed in the car to do an action at least for people who are elderly.
Oh no.
Who are.
Oh no, it's cutting out again.
Okay, I'm gonna keep. Anyway, let me say this and then I'll.
Yeah.
I think that so we took our kids to Stateville and we drove around and we prayed and we participated in our brothers who are incarcerated and at great danger because they're not able to social distance in overcrowded
prisons.
Yeah.
Almost there.
So
now you're silent.
Now you're muted, yeah.
Well, maybe. Oh, you're muted. But maybe. So I know, like, so it's going to be strong, but because Sandra's been part of a cohort that's been classes and teaching. She's been teaching at Stateville Men's Prison, and I've been taking a class there as well. Yeah. And so the understanding that the system that was already set up with criminal justice system and our incarceration system. And we're going to be talking about that in 2 weeks. Whoever was interested, we're going to have some folks on another webinar. But that the system is already set up beforehand that's harmful to people, and especially people people of color, right? So Black and brown folks are at the highest percentages in these facilities. And now we're talking about COVID-19, and there's no such thing as social distancing, and there's no such thing as like, oh, I can just go get something to clean down my cell. Like, no, and so this thing is spreading, and we've already lost 2 men who are part of our cohorts. So
wow.
So thinking about talking about like the church and the systems that have been set up within these churches, these smaller quote unquote smaller churches that are an example to other churches, right? Like, what systems have we set up beforehand, or systems or community or relationships really beforehand, that in a time of crisis open up a reality of who we are in this time. And the same thing with the criminal justice system. This is the prison system. The Cook County Jail has the highest, here in Chicago, has the highest number of COVID-19 infected people, right? So, and there's a reason when you have an overcrowded place, and why are they overcrowded, right? So again, what are the systems we have beforehand? Sandra, you're back. And then we'll go to Jason.
And all that to say that I think that is formation for my children. That is kids ministry for my children. That we're teaching them that through this experience, by loving our neighbors directly, the people that live, on our block, and by driving an hour to go and do this, that not everyone, we're exposing them to the reality that not everyone lives the same life.
Yeah.
We're trying to explain to their 5-year-old selves why that might be. And we're connecting it to their faith, because I think I grew up learning about that, obviously, because I was a child of an immigrant, but I didn't know what it had to do with my faith, except that Jesus still loved me even though these things happened. I wasn't taught that through my, Southern Baptist white church experience, that was connected to my faith in any way, and that I had a responsibility as a person who loved Christ to pursue compassion and justice as a part of my faith. And so when I realized it had been missing from my discipleship, I think it really spurred me on to say, well, what does it mean for me to raise children, to disciple congregants, and to shape and form students through InterVarsity in a way that allows them to be free to understand that there is a lifestyle of worship that God is asking for that's so much more fulfilling than what we're teaching sometimes.
Yeah. Jason, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, hey, I'm just enjoying listening, because these guys are saying things much more important than me. But yeah, I'm with all of that. I think it's, as Sandra said earlier, like, especially as pastors, as leaders, this is a tremendous opportunity for us to be reflective, introspective, and hopefully a challenge for those, especially those pastors in churches that maybe look more like me and are in that majority culture and have been in that space of being more about what's taught. And but I don't know. I mean, truthfully, history doesn't leave me very hopeful, but I'm trusting that God will use this in some ways to see some change there. I think it's definitely a time for all of us to evaluate, what have we been doing and how are we living this out, right? And I definitely agree. If this time is only about, how now we can use technology to deliver better sermons or better small groups, then we've missed some of the bigger picture here. But really, what ministry, what is discipleship able to do in this space should it be done in all situations, right? I think also as a pastor, truthfully, for some of us, it's a challenge for our own pride and ego in some ways, that we've wanted to have a little bit too much control and too much influence. I mean, truthfully, if our people aren't able to live out their faith well without us, then have we really discipled and led them well? If they're overly dependent upon a weekly message or a daily thought from us, to me, this is a chance where all people are able to live out what they know. Like, that's discipleship, right? Put it into practice. So if that means walking next door and praying for your neighbor or offering them some food, you know, like things that you would hope we would do already, but we probably aren't in ways that we should. So I think this is certainly a space for us to reevaluate our leadership, what vision we're casting and setting. To your point, because that's generally where it sort of starts. And if we're not doing that, then we need to see what changes we can make.
I think actually you guys like hit like some the actually key points that I have, so we don't need the other questions. And I would love to leave space. One, before we transition, for those here, if you have a question, we just want to leave space, a question or a thought you'd like to add. But like for some closing thoughts, as you think about maybe like in a minute or a minute and a half, you guys, our guest, I'd love to hear, like, so then what are you looking for when the stay-at-home orders are lifted? Who do you hope your congregation, how it will be, or your community, how will it be different? What are you hoping for them to be at that time? Oh, Paco, you have to unmute.
I have a couple of thoughts. You know, we've been going really thinking, being mesmerized by the beauty of the power of the resurrection, especially during this season for us. And it's interesting that Jesus shows up, and it's a damnant that he wants his disciples to touch him and to eat with them. And feel like, you know, something, if we only continue to gather together, you know, like this, then somehow we would have failed in our humanity. You know, like people gathering together as family, sharing life together is what Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, did. And feel like that's I hope we go back to gathering together, but I'm not so much enamored with the idea of Sunday morning as being the main gathering of people. I feel like, you know, we must go back to the great gift that God has given us to eat together fish and, you know, like, you know, celebrate together and affirm the power of the risen Lord among us, you know, in eating together and sharing life together. And I feel like that's extremely important. And I want to kind of affirm that. But on the other side, you know, of course, many of us went through thinking about, you know, what does Good Friday look like for us? You know, like what does Holy Thursday look for us, and look like to us? And this year, many people did this, but we just invited people. Hey, we're not having a Thursday anything. Just gather together as a family and minister communion to one another. Jesus is among you, and then if you feel like you should do this, wash each other's feet. You know, Jesus said, if you do this, you know, Jesus said for us to do this, and then people just from our congregation, I'm sure it happened in many other places, but started sending pictures of people washing each other's feet at home, and you know, with family, friends, or grandma or something. And that was one of the very few moments where I just have wept tears of joy, thinking homes, families, people that, you know, do oikos together with one another are washing each other's feet. It would have been sad for them to come to a Thursday night service and have missed that opportunity. And so we've experienced something brand new that somehow we never planned it, you know, ourselves. And how can we live into that further, you know, explore further the power of, you know, like when Jesus, you know, when the Apostle Paul tells the Philippian jailer, you know, you would be saved, you and your household. He wasn't talking about mom and dad and, you know, several kids. He was talking about, you know, like your network of family, friends, grandma, you know, neighbors, people that you do life with. What does it look like for the gospel to be spread out there, more than at a Sunday morning, like, join us on Sunday morning. Sunday morning is great. I don't have anything against it, but the power of the church has always been, there, in life.
Maybe Jason and then Sandra.
Amen. I would just say, I think my hope is, of course, we're excited about more physical interaction and the importance of that. Excited to be able to, hug folks again and see folks, more directly. But I guess if I'm just thinking about what I'm hoping to see, the change in us is, I would just simply say that that we'd be less selfish, and that we would be more motivated by loving one another, that we would be spurred on by this towards good works in all the ways that we've talked about. Those of us that may live with more privilege or more resources, more income, that we would be further motivated to take what we have and to figure out how we can better share that with others. Amen. And that would be the lifestyle that we've talked about, and that it wouldn't just be a momentary thing, but it would truly change us, and that we would look more like the church that we see, starting in the book of Acts. And so I thank God that this is moving some of us in that direction. I hope it's moving many of us, but that's my desire.
So I am really hoping that when this particular season of the pandemic passes, that we will be able to, as Christians and as Christian leaders, those of us that lead either students on campus or pastors in the city or, in neighborhoods, that we will have said at the end of it, we were on the right side of history. Mm-hmm. And I'm just not sure that's true right now. So I think that's my hope and my prayer. I'm going to make a confession that I watch British, like time, like seasonal, like timepieces. I don't know, like shows. And I'm watching Anne with an E, which is a remake of Anne of Green Gables, which was like, during my time as a kid, which tells you how old I am. Anyway, all that to say that in the show, it's like this Canadian agricultural town, and it's all white people, obviously. And like towards season 3, they start adding in like the story of the residential Indian boarding schools in Canada. And it's just through this drama, and this guy from Trinidad comes, and because he's a friend of one of the guys. And so you see these white people who see a black person for the first time, and like, they just say things out loud. Like, you just say things, the kids are saying things. And the show is light and funny, but it brings in these pieces. And my husband's like, why do you watch these shows? Like, and I was like, I don't know. Cause the British history, like historically, it's like a lot of evil, like, why do you like these shows? And I said, I think for the first time, I understand why I like them, because I watch all of them. There's always a protagonist or a set of protagonists in these stories. Like Anne is a young orphan who wasn't socialized. So she doesn't know not to talk to people who are different. And she doesn't know to follow orders. So she protests, and she teaches her friends at school to protest, and she raises her voice, and she says things she shouldn't. And she changes this old couple that adopted her to move from like complete racist to anti-racist in a matter of 3 seasons, and I think there's something in me that says, I would like to throw out the church sometimes, to be honest with you. I would like to throw out the church in this country for its history and for its complicity in history, not for silence, but actual participation in all of the evils that we have done here. But I have this show that has these protagonists that somehow not only are able to embody Christian compassion and love and justice, but they compel others in kind of peculiar ways to do the same. And I think that it gives me hope. So I watch Anne with an E because Anne gives me hope. She's a 16-year-old girl who doesn't know her place as a woman or as an orphan, who doesn't just shut down when people call her trash, but she rises above it and then brings her peers with privilege along this journey with her. And I think it gives me hope. That's what I'd like to see. I'd really like to see, and I'm not too, I don't have too much confidence in like my generation and above, to be honest with you. I'm just being honest. I hope we have some, people that can be changed, but I really think there is a leadership of 20s and 30s that are coming up that are saying, we'd like to design something new. And we'd like to do it in your church, Pastor. And if you don't let us do it, we're going to do what God calls us to. So let me know, like, can you help me? Can you mentor me? Can you show me? And I think that that's what I'd like to see, not only in my own church that is full of young people, but in Chasing Justice. I'd like to see us guide a generation to biblical and grounded and rooted compassion and justice that is not apart from their faith. And that's what I'm praying this thing gives us a chance to be on the right side of history. Our cities and our states and our country is passing some policies right now that Christians should be irate about, and we're silent. And I think it's our Christian discipleship duty to respond.
Yeah. Well, we are at the hour, and this has been awesome. Hey, Lisa and Oscar and Larissa, thanks for hanging with us this time. And I'm sure I'd love to, sorry, we can't do the questions today, but that's okay. You can cut the live feed. Thanks, Facebook Live, for those who've been watching. And thank you again to our guests, Paco Amador, Sandra Van Opstal, and Jason Dewey, for giving of your time and sharing with us.